because the insurance companies are giving them a hard time to reimburse them for talking. So they're not going to spend hours because people don't want to pay. Therapy is expensive, but I always say it's better to pay the therapist than to live a miserable, unconscious life and not know what the heck ails you and why you're so upset. And, it usually goes back to childhood or whatever, but you got to work those kinks out if you want to be a happy, productive person. I say I divide people into different categories. One is conscious and the other is unconscious. I mean, when you go through therapy, you understand a little bit about why you do the things you do, even if you do something self-destructive. You at least have these aha moments where it's like, oh, why did I do that? Oh, well, but if you don't have any self-analysis, self-awareness, you're flying blind.
It's very interesting, and the gay lifestyle nowadays. And I just want to give you an example. I watched Three's Company, and Jack, who played the gay character, would be laughed at and by Mr. Furley or one of the Ropers, and it was just so insensitive. As I look at it now, if they would ever say something like what they did in that sitcom, it's just amazing that how different things are from the late 70s, early 80s to this day and age. Your thoughts?
Oh, it's amazing. It's amazing. And, it gives me hope for other issues like the animal issue, because there were, I would say, when I was growing up, I mean, I knew one gay person, and, her mother was upset, and it was just a negative drama. And that was my, impression of what it was all about. And things have evolved and changed so rapidly. And, it just requires people to say, okay, just live your own life as long as you're not hurting me or anybody else. I mean, isn't that the motto, or the conservative motto, don't tread on me? That's why I find this obsession with what other people are doing in their bedroom or in the bathroom stall so astounding. And I have to go back to psychology, because psychologists will tell you that people who are obsessed with other people's sexuality and they're very, very judgmental are usually, quite often, repressing their own homosexual urges. So that's a way to look at it from a psychological perspective, because really, why does, person A care about what person B is doing in his or her bedroom? As long as it doesn't involve children, okay? Or in some other perversion that hurts people, like, some kind of horrible sex crime or date rape or anything. But if two consenting adults are in bed doing whatever they're doing, why is person A so obsessed with that issue and absolutely determined to stop it and offended by it? Well, the shrinks will say that's reaction formation. You create a smokescreen. And that's why I say it's important to go into analysis, because if you haven't been analyzed, you would never be able to realize that. But then all of a sudden, in the process of learning about yourself, you might realize, gosh, there's got to be a reason why I care so much about this.
Yes, and we had one football player that came out, and the odds tell us that there's definitely more that just haven't came out, in my opinion. And one did come out in the NBA, Jason Collins, and Charles Barkley said, we played with many. There's just a fear of them coming out, meaning the gay people. So hopefully Jason Collins and Michael Sam, there will be more. But I did want to play this clip for you.
Go ahead.
Sure. Regarding Mr. Bruce Springsteen, and then I want to get your thoughts on it on the other side.
Bruce Springsteen and his E Street Band have canceled their concert scheduled for tomorrow in Greensboro, North Carolina, to protest the state's new law blocking anti-discrimination measures for gay, lesbian, and transgender people. Springsteen said the law overturns progress in recognizing the human rights of all people. His boycott is one of a growing number of economic hits to North Carolina and other states adopting similar laws. Joining me now to discuss that is political reporter Kevin Robillard. Joins us from Washington. So how significant has this been for North Carolina? I mean, it's been bad press for them all week, but does this make an economic impact?
Clearly, it's starting to have one. Last night, there were some reports from the North Carolina media that, significant numbers of conventions were either canceling or reconsidering going to North Carolina, which is something that translated to, the thousands, potentially the tens of thousands in hotel room stays. And, chances are when you're staying in a hotel, you're also, going out to eat and, purchasing things at nearby stores for your family or whatever. So, yeah, this is something that has a ripple effect when, these boycotts or decisions not to go to North Carolina start stacking up.
I heard the NBA All-Star Game is supposed to be in Charlotte next year, and even Charles Barkley is asking for it to move, a former player and a commentator. There was also PayPal that pulled the opening of a 400-person facility in the state.
Yeah, that was a really significant one because also one thing that every state is trying to do is trying to woo tech companies like PayPal to their state. So if these tech companies in particular make a big stand on this, that's something that could really discourage governors like Pat McCrory in North Carolina from passing these similar laws. And you've since seen a lot of Democratic governors who are sort of trying to maybe stick it in the eye of North Carolina, sort of put out their hands and say, hey, PayPal, come here. The Democratic governor of Montana, for instance, said, hey, PayPal, we'll come up with a tax package for you to move here instead of moving to North Carolina.
Well, what's also interesting is it seems to pit two different sides of the Republican Party, the pro-business side against the social conservative side.
Yeah, and this is, an ongoing fight between the Republican Party. They have these two wings. These two wings are always going to clash just on the base level of what the Republican Party should prioritize. But this is an instance where these things are coming into direct conflict. And that's really a problem for a lot of Republicans because the social conservatives tend to provide sort of the grassroots of the Republican Party. They're the Republican Party's most reliable voters. But the business community is, quite frankly, where most of the money funding the Republican Party comes from. And that's their biggest source of money so that they can air TV ads and whatnot. So it really is a situation where if you're a Republican politician, you don't want to anger either one of these groups. So far, however, in this fight, the business community is winning just because they seem to have the economic leverage. And you've seen it used in North Carolina, and you also saw it used very well in Indiana, which had a very similar controversy last year.
Does this trickle up, at least on a national scale, either in the presidential election or in other, let's say, gubernatorial elections around the country?
So in the presidential election, so far it hasn't really impacted the GOP primary all that much. That said, at this point, a majority of Americans do support gay rights, and it hurts the image of the Republican Party in general. So that's something that, don't be surprised if you see Hillary Clinton really going out of her way to speak out against laws like this if she becomes the general election nominee. As for gubernatorial races, yeah, there's really going to be two on the ballot in the fall, where this is really going to be the central issue. Pat McCrory from North Carolina is up for re-election in November. He's facing the Attorney General of North Carolina, Roy Cooper. And then in Indiana, which again had a very similar controversy last year, Mike Pence is facing a Democrat named John Gregg. Both of those are expected to be very, very contested elections and two of the closest governor's races in the country. And this might turn out to be the decisive issue in both of them.
All right, political reporter Kevin Robillard joining us from Washington. Thanks so much.
Great to be on.
Jane Velez Mitchell, what's your thoughts on what's going on in North Carolina and what Bruce Springsteen did with his concert?
I applaud Bruce Springsteen. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And if you're going to behave in a hateful manner and pass hateful legislation, expect consequences. Because at the end of the day, the only thing that gets through is money. Cha-ching. You want to have that idea and you want to discriminate against people based on their sexual orientation, which is not something they choose. It's something they're born with. I certainly didn't choose being gay. In fact, I fought like hell to be straight for years. I got married to a man. No way in hell I was going to be gay. And guess what? I was gay, and I drank over it. I realized that the reason I came out after I got sober is that I couldn't drown my sexual orientation in Chardonnay anymore. So, there's consequences for that kind of hateful ideology, and it's all such nonsense. I mean, oh, you're worried about transgenders in bathrooms. It's like, you know what? There are people being raped and murdered all over this country, unfortunately. Women chopped up, often by their boyfriends. Intimate partner violence is a leading cause of violence. And when people kill, usually there's a personal connection. And even when there's a stranger connection, it's not being done by men who have had male-to-female operations and now have vaginas. And it's not being done by women who have decided that they're men trapped in women's bodies and who got a sex change operation. The boogeyman has nothing to do with it. It's people's fear of the whole issue because, and I'll tell you why, it's that we define ourselves primarily by our gender more than anything else, by our ethnicity, our race, our nationality, and our gender. And so when you start saying to people that that's fluid, and that, guess what? You really have to find a deeper identity than just your gender. You have to know who you are in your soul. And you can't just put on, a hackneyed stereotype of tough guy or, oh, I'm a little princess. Those are my dogs. And you can't just, that's not an identity. So, stop it. The reason it freaks people out is it kind of makes them realize on a very deep level, oh my God, I can't just rely on that. That I'm, people use a lot of things. They use careers and their job for their identity too, and that's why you see men when they retire, particularly men, because it's more important. I think society tells them for men, although it's increasingly important for women, thank God. But when a man retires, he loses his identity, and all of a sudden he doesn't know who he is or why he's alive, and then he becomes despondent, and soon he's half a shell of a person because he used his career as a crutch all his life to form an identity. And the same is true with gender. Ultimately, we have to find out who we are as individuals, and how do we find that out? Well, what do we care about? What are our values? And I'm not just talking about the, Hallmark cards family values. I'm talking about, for example, to me, my journey has been to compassion. I feel that my value, what makes me tick, the most important thing is to have compassion, to have empathy, not just for other people, but for all living beings, who have eyes and hearts, and who feel pain and suffering. And so ultimately it's about not hurting and not killing. And, that's when it gets back down to going plant-based, because you have to kill animals to eat them, and they live horrible lives. And so I like to say peace begins on your plate.
Absolutely. And, you obviously had your situation. How hard was it to actually come out 100% and say, this is who I am?
Well, it was difficult. But, when I gave up the alcohol and I hit bottom on it, I found that I couldn't lie to myself anymore. It was so fascinating. Like, as long as I could drink, I could make up a story about myself. I think life is really about getting honest with yourself. It's a journey of self-honesty. We all have character defects, and, life, I think, for me, being sober 21 years now, for me it's about emotional sobriety and getting honest with myself about my behavior. But after I realized, and I actually told my therapist, I think I'm gay, and, of course, he had figured that out a long time before I had. And
really?
Ultimately, yeah, I mean, I think also on some level, everybody knows everything. At some level, everybody knows everything. And I was actually doing a radio show with a log cabin Republican named Al Rantel. And we were talking about, I came out on the radio spontaneously. We were talking about Senator Larry Craig. Yeah, I was filling it. It was in between when I was doing Celebrity Justice and before I had the show, and I was doing freelance at KABC and radio, and so we were talking about Senator Larry Craig, the toe tapping